I don't usually go over my criteria when I start a project, but this time I'm going to show my preliminary work. These are 4 sketches of ideas for a pinch pot that's going to be at least 4 inches tall, and it's going to be about a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch thick, and it's going to have some sort of coil foot. It's also going to have either a pattern or a texture on the entire outside surface and have a smooth inside. Next, I'm going to show that I selected one of those preliminary sketches and did a drawing, adding some more details to it and thinking through it more carefully. The same criteria, but as you can see, this is my 4th sketch, and there's more detail to it. I have shading. I'm trying to show the form of the object as well as the textures on the surface and the patterns that I'm going to use. It's probably good to note here that this is not necessarily exactly what it's going to look like. This is my idea and where I start from. I may make some adjustments on the way. It may look a little bit different than this. As a matter of fact, in the one that I did make, I put some buttons on the side rather than just the stitching going down it, and I didn't put the little markings on the snake. Today I'm going to make a decorative pinch pot. I have a lump of clay that should be sufficient. If I need more, I can get more. I have some simple tools, water and slip, and I'm going to show you how to make a pinch pot. First, we're going to knead the clay together to make sure there aren't any air bubbles in it. And then I'm going to pull off a piece because I'm going to need a foot later, and I know that. So this I'm setting aside for later so that I can put a foot on the pinch pot. Then I'm going to mash it into a ball, roll it relatively smooth, getting all of the lumps out of it as I go. It doesn't have to be perfectly smooth. I'm going to take my tool here, this is my thumb, and I'm going to press it into the ball, and I'm going to push it almost all the way down to the bottom. Now I can tell when it's real close to the bottom. If I don't push it all the way in, I could make my pot too wide, and then I won't have enough clay to make it tall. So if I push my thumb all the way down to the bottom until just before it comes out the other side, I can start working up the sides by pinching. Notice I have fingers on the outside and thumb on the inside, and I'm gently pushing around and around and around so that I can flatten out those walls thinner and thinner as I go, and I'm rotating it so that I get it relatively even all the way around that pinch pot. Now, as usual, I'm going to speed up the video when I have a repetitive task because you don't need to sit here watching me do it in real time. From beginning to end, building this pinch pot and the video took about an hour. And occasionally you'll see me do tasks like checking how tall it is with the handle of the brush. I know that that's 4 inches on the plastic part of the handle. It needs to be at least 4 inches tall, but that includes the foot, so I have a bit of leeway there. I'm going all around over and over again, trying to keep it even as I go around to try to make sure that it doesn't get too lopsided and stays relatively round. It's easier to do that constantly than to try to fix it later. I'm also going to do things like smooth out the sides, especially inside with water. Occasionally when it starts cracking, I need to do that to make sure that it doesn't fall apart or get really rough. I don't want to add too much water because that would make it all squishy, but I need to sometimes just make sure that the surface is nice and smooth. And I do that especially on the inside because I know that one of the things I need to do is make sure the inside is smoothed out. I can use my fingers and I can use the brush. Sometimes I can even use a sponge to smooth things. Now I've put it upside down, you can see, and I'm just making sure that the outside is relatively symmetrical. Often you'll see me using water to smooth things out, or occasionally I'll pick up a stick or a brush and just use the flat side of something to pull off some clay, to use something stiffer than my fingers. It's surprising how malleable your fingers are, and they don't necessarily give you the best surface to work with. That's why we tend to use a stick. Next, you'll see me doing something sort of counterintuitive. That means that it's sort of the opposite of what you think it would do. I'm going to use a scoring tool and I'm going to lightly rough up the surface. I don't want to do it very deep, but I want to be able to make some slip out of the surface and just sort of redistribute it and make it smoother. And to do that, I need to get more surface area. and using the scoring tool allows me to do that. I'm going to do it around the whole outside. It's going to smooth it out and give me a nicer surface to work on than the surface that I already had. You don't always have to do this, but if you have something that's really lumpy and you want to get some of the lumps out, doing this a couple of times often helps. I'm going to go to warp speed here for just a moment because I have a lot of repetitive tasks, a lot of the same stuff basically, and you don't need to sit that much through it. Now I want to make the simple point that clay is very malleable and will take textures from just about anything. So you can press tools into it, you can incise into it. Dragging a tool across the surface isn't necessarily the best way to make a mark into the surface. By pressing it in, you get a lot more control and you get less stuff that you have to clean off. You can press clay onto surfaces, like here's a piece of burlap. We would take the texture from that, or here's a piece of plastic that looks a lot like burlap when you press it in, and it takes the texture from the surface that you press it into. It's not always the easiest thing to do with a pinch pot because it's a little bit more delicate and it's an interesting shape to try to push onto some other surface. But we can use some of the tools. So I'm going to make sort of a fabric texture by making lines going one way and then lines going another into the surface. And to do that, notice I'm not just using it like a pencil. I'm getting it wet occasionally. This is my scoring tool. And I'm pulling it at a low angle gently through the clay. And it's making a scoring pattern into the side. I'm giving it a texture is what I'm doing. This is using a pattern, which is line after line after line, and texturizing the surface. And this is going to take a while, so I'm going to speed that up as well. You may notice that I'm not just haphazardly putting lines around the pot. I'm putting them horizontally, and then I'm going to switch to vertical. One set of lines going over the other at a right angle. They're not just random. I'm trying to make this look sort of like fabric. I'm going to pull up my reference picture again so that you can see that I wanted to make something that looked like a seam down the side of the pot. Now a pinch pot is made all out of one piece of clay, and I am going to attach some pieces to it later by using scoring and slipping, but if you can make something out of just one piece without attaching things together, it's stronger. So I'm going to make it, or try to make it, look like one piece is folding over another and one piece is a seam that goes underneath by using a tool. So now here you see the first thing I'm going to do is take a stick and I'm going to make a line where I want that seam to be. And then I'm going to take the end of the stick and just gently, with some water, press one piece so it looks like it goes under the other. And then I'm going to add some more of that texture to it using the scoring tool so it looks sort of like fabric. I want it to be sort of seamless even though I'm trying to make it look like a seam. It occurred to me around here that perhaps making it look like they're stitching up the side might be lost in all of that texture. So I thought, well, maybe if I made something that looked like buttons going up the side, that would be good. Now these are separate pieces. They're just little balls of clay that I smushed flat and made round, put little holes on them, and I'm going to score and slip both the pot and the back of the button. So I put some score marks on the back of the button, I put it on the pot where I wanted to attach it, and then I put slip in the score marks on both the button side and the pot side. And I'm going to do this. I think I have room for 2 buttons here, so I'm going to put one above the other. Practically all of my videos I harp quite a bit about scoring and slipping. The structure is always strongest when it's made out of one piece of clay and pinched, but if you're going to put pieces together, you have to score both surfaces that are being connected and put slip in the score marks for both surfaces before you press them together, and the slip should squirt out the side. If you fail to score and slip properly, they will come apart, if not now, then later. You can see that I like this part of my design so much that I'm going to do it over and over again so that as you turn the pot around, you'll see buttons and seams. Next, I'm going to use that clay that I set aside for the foot, and I'm going to make a small coil. I need a coil that will go basically in a circle on the bottom of this pot, which you can see I've turned the pot over and the bottom becomes the top when I do that. I'm just checking now for length. To roll a coil, I use my fingers on a nice smooth surface until I get just the size that I want, and maybe a little bit extra, and then I cut it to size. I'm going to score and slip this coil in place. I'm going to both score on the bottom of the pot and the side of the coil, and then the ends of the coil where I connect it. Every part that connects to something else needs to be scored and slipped to make sure that it doesn't come apart later on. And I need to put slip in all of the score marks. If I don't, there will be some gaps there that can very easily come apart. You may also notice that I use a lot of water and slip to smooth things out, and eventually I'm going to use a wooden tool here to sort of blend the edges. Eventually I'm going to turn it over and put a bit of pressure on that foot, that coil, to make it nice and even, to give a nice stable bottom to my pot. Right now you can see that I'm just sort of smoothing out the edges and making sure that that seam with the slip squirting out gets nice and clean. See me running a brush with some water in it over the surface to smooth things out a bit. Sponges work very well for this too. It doesn't always have to be a brush. So just something to put water on there that's not necessarily your finger, although your finger will work in many cases. And you can see that I'm doing more decorating on the back as well. Once again, I'm going to pull up my reference picture, and I'm going to note that it looks like the cloth from the inside, the smooth inside, is overlapping on the top. I'm going to focus my attention now on putting something on top that looks sort of like it's coming over. And to do that, I'm going to need just a little bit more clay so that I can make sort of a bib on top. And I will attach that by scoring and slipping it as well. I'm going to start this shape on top by making a rough coil, and then I'm going to press it flat and get it kind of thin because I don't want my cloth to look too thick. You might see from this that I'm basically making a long, thin coil, at least thin in one direction, much like a slab. And I got it so thin that I actually broke it, so I had to fix it. And then I just cut little bits off the side until I get basically what I want to work with. And I'm going to smooth it up with some water, and then I'm going to score it and slip it to the top of the container. And that's going to, there we go, putting some slip in there, and I'm going to put it around the top of the container. And then here I am putting it in place. It's going to break a bit. I have to score and slip those breaks back together, or I can use them to look like tears in the fabric. And you can see that I'm trying to get it in place here. Round and round I go, putting in other pieces as I go, scoring and slipping the pieces into place as I go, and occasionally I'm using that scoring tool as well to rough up the surface so that I can blend it nice and smooth. And I'm getting it to go all the way around, looking like it's going from the inside to the outside. And on the inside I'm going to have to blend it quite a bit, but on the outside I just want it to flop over. Something that you might want to note: this is not my first pinch pot, but when you're doing an unusual design, sometimes you have to reassess and restart projects. I started making this video 4 times before this, each one about 2 or 3 minutes into it. I realized that I wasn't going to get it tall enough, or I didn't have the proper tools in front of me, or whatever it might have been. But I restarted the process over and over again so that I could show you from beginning to end what it might look like to do this. My point is tenacity and the ability to reassess and look at a problem over and over again is crucial, especially when you're learning to do something or you're doing something that you're not used to doing, like making a pot with all of these different textures on it and a specific size. Once you get it down, you might be able to do it over and over again, but the first time, it may take a bit. Now you're going to notice that I'm going to do something very important here. I'm going to put my name in the bottom of my pot. If you don't put your name in the bottom of a pot and you have a large class, it's very difficult to find out who something belongs to. So make sure that you put your name on the bottom. No one's going to see this down here, and you need to push it into the surface, not just scribble it on there. You need to be able to read it once it's dry. Now I am again going to pull in my reference drawing. You'll notice that for some reason I decided this looked a little bit like a snake charmer's basket, but I put the snake on the bottom as part of the coil. So the next thing I'm going to do is fashion a head and maybe an end of a tail to make it look sort of like there's a snake down there instead of just the plain foot that we put on there before. Here you're going to see me take a small ball of clay from some of the scraps and push it together and form a head shape and maybe a little bit of a coil for part of the snake's body. You'll see me put some little tiny balls on there for eyes, and then you'll also see me put, like I said, a little bit snake body coil, and I'm going to score and slip these together. By putting score into the marks, and then scoring and slipping it into place, and then blending it into place, all of those things together are going to make it sort of come to life. So you can see me here scoring on the sides, making sure that there's slip in all the score marks, and then attaching one piece to the other and blending it over with a stick to make it look like the snake is part of the coil there. And then I decided that it just looked like there was a coil with a snake head on it, so I was going to put a piece of tail on there too, sort of coming over and next to the snake head. So that's what you have here, making a little coil, scoring it, slipping it, putting it in place, and then you'll see that it crisscrosses over here, and I'll give you a better shot when we get to the end here so you can see what it looks like. Here is the greenware. It's been drying for a couple of days, and at this point it's becoming more and more fragile. So we want it to dry for quite a while longer, maybe a week, before we put it in the kiln. But you need to, or want to see the textures on the sides, the button shapes, the snake shape, folds on the top, the smoothness of the inside. Not much that can be done to it now, maybe a little bit of smoothing, but really it's finished. So the last thing to do in this case is to check the criteria. It's at least 4 inches tall, the walls are the proper thickness, the inside is smooth, the outside has one basic texture across the entire surface. Okay, the bottom is flat, and the rim is smooth and free of clay crumbs. It has a coil foot, even though it looks a bit snaky, and my name is on the bottom. All of these things have been done. It's ready to put it in the kiln as soon as it's dry enough.